Some of you may be able to hear me, some may not. I believe I've finally got this broadcasting software working correctly. So, welcome to my playthrough of Kerbal Space Program version 0.24 career mode. The mods I am playing with, for those of you who have not followed my Carbon and Beyond New Beginning thread, are Ferrum Aerospace Research, MechJet 2, and that's actually all, folks. Right now, I am about to launch this beautiful space taxi. Give me a moment for some of you to hopefully tune into the thread. This vehicle, for those of you who've not seen my thread or my previous attempt to stream this, is intended to ferry my Kerbals between specialized crew launch capsules that I've been deploying, almost entirely on solid rocket boosters. It's literally one VACC, one Route 10, and a probe port on top of a command capsule. That's the launch vehicle. With FAR, that works great. It can get to orbit. Without, you don't have a chance. This will be ferrying Kerbals between that and my other orbital missions and installations. Currently, I have a moon mission that I'm just beginning. This is the last component of the infrastructure. So those of you who continue to watch will see that mission in progress. 1 or 2 more minutes and launch will commence. That's good. Alright, just grab a quick snack to time me over while I go through this launch and wait for more people to tune in. For those of you watching after the fact, which I'm starting to guess will be most of you, I do and hope you enjoy, and from here I'll be proceeding with some commentary. But let's get this rocket off the ground, first of all. Liftoff. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. while this was going on, those of you who were listening last night, when I attempted this launch before, I actually made a mistake in not the launch, but the deployment of the orbital depot on the top. This is meant to be a reusable fuel depot. But for those of you who were watching last night, I regaled you with tales of the wonders of thermal rocketry and why we probably shouldn't be launching things with chemical rockets. This is a pet peeve of mine because we're never going to get to space cheaply with chemical rockets. It's just not going to happen. If humanity wants to leave Earth, wants to colonize other planets, we're going to have to get to space a lot cheaper. One of the first steps is this wonderful stuff called thermal rocketry. I'll tell you a little bit more about that, but for now, we just exit the atmosphere, so that's the stuff. doesn't look like the parachute structure when you pull it up. Apparently, you can use staging to instead of action. It doesn't show up in the engine. I think it's a bug. But anyways, while we wait for this to re-enter, I'll speed up a bit as much as I can. Chemical rockets suffer from lousy specific impulse. For their thrust-to-weight ratio, while impressive, is also not the best you could potentially get from a rocket. The combination of this is plenty of engine mass, though it's exaggerating. Kerbal Space Program engines are much heavier than the real-life counterparts relative to thrust, and large amounts of fuel tanks stacked rocket. More in this game because it's about 10,000 kilometers a second delta V to get to orbit in real life instead of about 4,500 with stock aerodynamics and 3.5 kilometers per second with FAR in this game. FAR because it creates a more realistic aerodynamics model, less loss of drag, but since the actual orbital velocity is very low in this game due to the small size of Kerbal, that leads to a much more efficient sense with FAR. Anyways, so I was saying, if we want to get space cheaper, we need smaller rockets with greater engineering margins. One of the things that makes rockets so expensive is built to very narrow margins. Something like at a maximum around 4% of mass can be payload. This creates undesirable, extremely tight margins to design things on. As you can see there, I lost a film. That seems to happen for some reason on this particular launch profile. I haven't observed it in previous uses of this same launch stage, but it's better than losing the whole stage. Some damage. Anyways, so because the margins are small for rockets, we have to build very high standards. We have to know very precise levels of structural loads things can take because they're built to very narrow margins. The amount of thrust that a rocket produces, all these things, we have to know to very small standard errors, which creates very high cost of construction and expensive rockets, on top of the fact they're large to begin with. If you could have a more proper propulsion system that will give you larger margins, you can build rockets more softly, more similar to a big dumb booster you saw my thread of the month earlier this month. Though it's still thread of the month until the beginning of August. Anyways, we could have much cheaper rockets if we just increase the margins. Then we wouldn't have to build so carefully to preserve that 4% payload fraction. For instance, many components on the space shuttle, to give one example, fuel cells burst at a pressure of 150% their operating pressure, i.e. that's not a very large margin. They would only have to have 50% extra pressure to burst. A normal fuel cell you might see in an airplane might be built something like a 10-to-1, or for very high performance craft, a 2-to-1 margin, which doesn't seem like much more, but you get an exponential effect because it's a bell curve, basically the chances of variance in load and strength. You get exponentially fewer failures with just a small increase in margin, and thus you can have a larger standard error. To have an acceptable level of failures, you can have larger standard errors because you don't need to know something's capabilities precisely as construction costs go down. Aside from that, if you had a better propulsion system, you could have smaller rockets to begin with. So better propulsion, especially in launch stage technology, is kind of key to getting us more of a cheap one. but chemicals only have so much in the way of capabilities. There's only so much you can do with, you know, liquid fuel mix or even solid rockets, which have advantages of density and typically larger margins because there are very high mass forces go through and such. And solid rockets will have contain these. It just ends up getting really thick walls. They tend to be a little cheaper, all in all. Consider many factors. It's not worth going too much detail. But whether you use solid rockets or liquid fuel, it's expensive to get things to space. If you use thermal rockets, now I've talked about this quite a bit. There's actually a mod that incorporates this direct wave beam power. It's the most promising ever. Basically, instead of using the chemicals in the rocket, you know, in the boosters or whatnot, contain all the potential energy you need, and those are limited by the bounds of what we can store in chemistry. You get, you get your energy source can be, well, I mean, your energy, well, first of all, your propellant velocity can be based on how hot heat is too. Because you're not expelling combustion products, which tend to be heavier in the rocket, you don't have to heat this high temperature to get higher exhaust velocity. For instance, a stream of water vapor, which is what you get when you burn hydrogen oxygen. In the space shuttle engine, it might have been around 3,500 Kelvin, maybe a little higher. The specific impulse you got from those was around the 400s. It was some of the actually the best rocket engines around because they were reusable, even if not very much so. So we amortized the cost of high performance over many launches. Though some may argue that was not a wise decision, we should have gone for cheaper engines. Anyways, if you have a stream of hydrogen gas, you can heat it to 2,400 degrees Kelvin, more than 1,000 degrees centigrade cooler, and you'll actually get a higher exhaust velocity and thus better specific impulse because hydrogen has a much lower molecular mass. H2 gas has 1/9 the molecular mass, actually, of a water molecule, H2O. H2 versus H2O, because the atomic mass of oxygen is 16, hydrogen is 1, approximately. Because energy equals 1/2 mv squared, if you have 1/9 the mass, you can do the math, you have around 3 times the velocity at the same speed. Therefore, you don't have to heat hydrogen strongly to get to the same exhaust velocity, and its lower exhaust velocity, you can easily exceed the exhaust velocity in specific impulse. So what thermal rocket often does is it takes a stream of hydrogen and heats it really, really hot, and there's no oxygen involved, so you're not getting higher molecular mass exhaust. It's just hydrogen, and you just need a heat source, and you get a very high exhaust velocity. And if you have enough mass flow, high enough pressures of hydrogen passing through the engine, then you get very high thrust as well. So the main challenge on its heat source, many of you are probably aware of nuclear thermal rocketry. It's what the NERVA engines in Stockholm use, as well as other NERVA-like projects. NERVA was actually a project with the U.S. government in the 1960s. However, there were previous projects, some of them in the late 50s, I believe, they began, and there were later projects. In the 90s, for instance, there was Project Timberwind, Timberwind, I believe, which used particle bed nuclear reactors, which you can actually find in the case of the Interstellar mod this game, to attain higher temperatures the reactor and better energy densities. Whereas you might have had a thrust weight ratio of around, I think, 2 at the best for Nerva. You could get around 10 with the Timberwolf. It's still not very good. Not great thrust weight ratio, even though the specific impulse is very good. So, a pet little thing of mine I've tried to talk to people a lot about. And let's recover this and get on the mission. So, something that I've tried to educate people about, so they understand why it's better, is beam power thermal rocketry. Basically, instead of lifting a heavy reactor into orbit with all the geopolitical and public concern implications you have that, you keep the reactor, or more likely, due to lower cost of public concern, maybe even coal power plant or a natural gas power plant, or solar or wind on the ground, and beam electricity to a rocket. What you then have is, instead of a standard engine, you have a thermal receiver that's some microwaves will pass through. These are not the same microwave waves. They will pass through most of the rocket, but you can generate a thermal receiver that's pink. They also pass through atmosphere pretty much very quickly, but you can beam them around, which doesn't work as well as lasers from the rocket. Oh, I'm right in. That's stuff. Probably gonna save a little time here. So I don't forget. As I was saying, if you beam power through the rocket, and you have this thermal receiver, one typical material that's been looked at is, again, keeps coming out, silicon carbide. It's actually fairly cheap to manufacture, and like I say, it's seen as a household product, one, but to manufacture the levels of precision you'd want for a space vehicle, even as this would be for a secure propulsion system. You wouldn't need the margin you need. It's in the specific impulse and thrust to weight ratio, so you could afford a rocket a little more softly times cheaper. And a cheap thermal receiver made of carbide is a lot cheaper than expensive. But what it basically is pass liquid hydrogen over the thermal receiver, which be towards the back of the rocket. You have fuel tanks, hydrogen goes in, it heats up, and it's expelled back to the rocket. It's simple nozzle. The temperature of this thing is maximum, it's around 24 to 25 degrees Celsius. Because silicon carbide doesn't do so well with the higher heat. You use more expensive materials for better simple temperature. But I could teach you guys about not going to. There's a trade-off between specific and bulk thrust. Because equals 1/2 squared, we need a much lower mass for a much lower thrust if you go for higher specific. So while you could increase the temperature, you'd have to send even more power to the rocket that way. But because you're using hydrogen with 1/9 more per mass of H2 for an H2 molecule. Let's just get on with this mission talking. So that little fuel tank will act as a kind of depot. It's not really a guided depot. It's more just, hey, I was going to stick something on the top, I drop tank, why not make it a little bigger, leave some fuel for future missions kind of thing. But I could eventually dock something with this, make part of a larger station, like I intended with my lander, for those of you who watch that, but I forgot to open the bay doors, and so it's useless, and there was almost no fuel left in that case, because the lander was heavy, it's the same size. Need to find the right recovery vehicle. I shouldn't have to dock over to the space center. What I'm doing here is having now deployed that nice little orbital depot. My space taxi is going to find a crew member in one of these crew capsules. I just find a capsule. Here we go, Bob. It's going to bring it to this mobile lab here, and then I'm going to take Kerbal, who's on the mobile lab, which is recovered actually for a recovery mission, put him back in his capsule, deorbit the capsule with the space taxi actually, will burn retrograde into curiosity inside that system, detach the capsule and then come out to the program, return that Kerbal surface, and then my mobile lab, my lander, is both going to hit the moon, and I'm going to actually start the moon. So, actually this is perfect. It's the one that my space taxi is approaching from behind. Lower orbit, which means lower orbital period, and means it's going to catch up. solid rocket booster launch vehicles to save on the slots, but the result of that was a rather elliptical. It makes it a little more difficult. You're going to have to. Probably closest to it for me a slight adjustment. But while this time works, it should take a while with the lash. So as I was saying, you thermal receiver, thermal nozzle, you have higher components, and you can also, I guess, material properties. You can get very high fuel throughput as well, high mass flow. You can actually get thrust to weight ratios that are at least comparable to around range of 50 to 150 pounds. The thrust compared to shoot. Wait a sec. Orbit. What's the very surface taking through the atmosphere? Sometimes they'll do that if I use mech depth. But alright, anyways. So, but you could very easily scale it up. Because one of the problems with chemical rockets is the more stuff you're burning, the more you're generating. And you can melt materials. But the temperatures are lower with thermal rocketry. And the more stuff you're passing through, the more you're cooling the thermal receiver. Temperatures go down, you have to use more energy to get higher. To get the same impulse with greater thrust. So you can actually get better thrust ratio. You could probably get around up to 250. I would have to look at the actual numbers. You can get better thrust ratio competition at higher specific. Specific impulses with hydrogen like this can get up to around 900, 800, 1,000 seconds, depending on the engineering margins you use. It might be worth going with 800, for instance, simply because it'd be cheaper than going to 1,000. You have to dope the silicon carbide with materials that make it more heat resistant, for instance, to get up to around 1,000. dope, because doping is what you do to silicon crystals, actually, to give them desired properties. It's used all the time in photovoltaics and circuits. You use similar technology here. Looking at this, it's going to go into the very defined order. I think it's going to be closer. I'm going to have to change this in a second. You don't need to waste the delta V then. Just keep the orbit less. I'll just get my metric with this. Anyways, so you build thermal receiver, you pass hydrogen. The thing is, you need an energy source to thermal. So that's where the whole microwave thing is coming into play this time. You have to transmit microwaves from the ground or from the ground to a orbital relay to the rocket, so that you don't have to have 3 interaction solutions. You have just one, a series of orbital relays. In fact, 3 relays, precisely positioned, or 4 to give a little better margin for the warp speed, can cover the entire sphere around the planet. So 3 or 4 relays in low Earth orbit can beam the power to anywhere you need, actually, for properly and have the relay surfaces be able to actuate a little relative to the rest of the satellites and such. But it's not insanely expensive, since these relays are really about the size of the typical communication satellite. So you have a dish, you can bounce the microwaves off using those, and you have a ground installation. You have a lot of energy generation and even more energy storage, because this is an intermittent use of energy. So you don't have, in being 10 megawatts of power, which is really low, you'd actually want to go with probably not less than 100 for even a very small rocket, and to the gigawatt range or higher for more powerful rockets. Which, by the way, some people, I've discussed this on the forum, some people think the rocket would melt if you beam that much power to a thermal receiver. It might if you weren't actively pulling hydrogen to pass through. The silicon carbide receiver is the only part of the material that takes the microwaves. Everything else doesn't heat up because the microwaves pass through. The silicon carbide is actively cooled by the hydrogen stream that's acting as a propellant passing over it. If there was not that hydrogen stream, it would not. But you basically avoid beaming power to it. You generate a lot of waste heat. So unless you have a very powerful and heavy radiator system, things will melt. But same in real life. It's the active. You always beam the power when you need it, and it's actively cooled by the hydrogen stream, which creates some timing issues, but nothing that can't easily be worked out. I mean, it's not like the silicon carbide will instantly degrade to temperature goes a little high for a short period of time. You probably want to start the hydrogen steam even before you start the silicon carbide, except a little lower specific impulse one, just to be safe. But anyways, you generate a bunch of electricity, you store even more. So capacitors are, a relatively low-cost way to store energy for shorter periods of time in high amounts. Use, I guess, various other technologies. You compress air the batteries to flyways, but you generate electricity, you store it, then you power up when you're launching a rocket. And to amortize the cost of this facility, which would be very expensive, you launch a lot of rockets. One plan looked at launching 300 rockets a year from this facility. The rockets would be really small, so each goes at about a ton of mass in orbit, or I think it was even less, maybe it was in the kilograms range, like 500 kilograms or something. But it's very small rockets, and you launch a lot per year. Is one way. And that way, the power plants and such don't have to be in large, high capacities if you launch fewer and heavier rockets. It saves on costs big time. But you beam the power to the rocket, then you beam the power to another rocket. You basically amortize the costs. It's really expensive ground infrastructure over a whole bunch of rocket launches. Now, I say really expensive. One thing I do have hard numbers for was that it's about $1 to $2 million for the generation, storage, and transmission for doing this electrolysis. If you use lasers, it's about $10 million per megawatt. To give an example, to give just a few hard numbers on the cost of this, and you need a minimum of 100 megawatts just for the very small rockets. That one company looked at launching 300 a year. They were talking about using lasers, which would be a massive $1 billion investment in ground infrastructure. If you use microwaves, even if the efficiencies are a little lower, it would still cost a lot less to get by with maybe an 120 megawatt ground facility that costs $240 million, which is still a lot if you want to amortize over many launches. I should not have been talking when I have adjustments to do. Wait a second. I should be talking about time warp. Anyways, while we wait, I wish I could time warp faster, but I can't, so wait we shall. So you launch a really cheap rocket. It's actually the thermal rockets. As I said, the thermal receivers are cheaper than chemical engines in engineering, in the levels of precision that you need to build chemical rockets with now, not cheap ones. If the chemical rockets were cheaper, lower precision rockets, then you wouldn't actually have such high costs, and they would be cheaper than thermal receivers. They're not, because they have very exacting margins, which drive up the cost a lot. Rockets are actually cheap. They're cheaper per tuning and thrust than jet engines, for instance, if they're built to low engineering margins. But anyways, I was saying you amortize the cost of ground infrastructure when they launch, and rockets themselves are cheaper than the chemical rockets, quite a bit, which allows you to essentially, not just because engines are cheaper, but because you need less fuel due to the higher specific impulse and thrust to weight ratios. Cheaper. I think the cost of it could come down to as low as $1,000 a kilogram if you use lasers. Those are the only things they have a hard figure, and it's cheaper still. For reference, it's about $10,000 a program right now to get sent to orbit. If you reuse the launch vehicles, you can try to further. Give an example with chemicals, which are expensive. SpaceX is looking at reusing the stages and expecting it to drive down launch costs from. Right now, they're the industry leader. They're a lot cheaper than these airplanes. They're around $4,000. They expect they could drive down the cost of close to $1,000. If we reuse the thermal rocket, well, the cost savings would be less because it's cheaper rockets to begin with. You can still drive down the costs to $1,500. If you wonder, I have no idea how much it would save on cost. If you had a very high launch volume, 300 rockets a year, and use the rockets, the reuse mode would be a lot more beneficial. Fewer launches. So, it would probably be big cost savings. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to initiate a hard dock action. I think pretty moving. Target. There we go. Right, that's so this needs to actually face what the heck? Other than the jittering. Jittering would actually probably do this justice. So I'm going to initiate hard dock because the alternative is I can either bring this to the mobile lab or I can go to Kerbal, grab the Kerbal from the lab and come back. I think doing just one transfer, bringing this to the mobile lab would be cheaper than with extra weight, cheaper than making two trips. So I'm going to bring the crew recovery capsule to the mobile lab. You'll see that in a second. Grab the rock. What I need here is basically a document precisely just translate, but I'm coming in a little fast. And I need to translate problem after match loss code. 100 times easier to I didn't think this through, or it would have been a very precise use of but it looks like it's work. And there we go. We should have this. But anyways. These close probably between for us, but it's easy to look at a lot more. Kind of lost for everything. So many wait a second while I unload and load this crap and fix this. As you patch your engineering trajectory, it's enough to some sort of error. I think it's because I had a vessel targeted when I docked that often causes issues. Really, the mobile lab is, the whole thing for recovery vehicle. And really, it's space taxi that would be more useful in English. Oh well. I think what's going on here is that orbit actually approaches the other so closely that having issues. Yep. That was the issue. I mean, we're home again. Hard. But anyways, so basically, so eventually it's for Link 4, not the experimental not actually created by mod offers practice. Okay. You actually get to see me demonstrate some of these technologies. That's actually a mod that does a very good job of simulating beam power and some of the stuff associated with that. And also this, they're feasible, but probably over a century. They're so overpowered that whole model is nonsense. I've never used those. They don't take off as a warp with the Outsphere warp drive. Technology could exist, but you need energy density to acquire energy. Helicopter to the engine. But I like it for microwave beam power. I have no desire to produce it. I say this, but maybe I'll give in if I ever get a Kerbal car and lock it. I think it's kind of overpowered and somewhat unrealistic. But microwave beam power and fusion reactors and such, very realistic, in fact more realistic. The higher performance of Timberwind style particle bed reactors, for instance, versus the Nerva style 1960s technology solid core reactors on stock, or there's other multi cell that are 10 to 20 years away today, that are also actually outperformed by particles, so they're not overpowered. But they're used from the real world because they're cheaper and easier to maintain, which, with balancing performance for should be reflected. They're especially cheaper and easier on the ground. Also get your first look at the magnificent Lunar Mobile Lab this way. So as I drift over to this, quite unrealistically I might add, because no real jetpack would have enough thrust to do this so quickly. There's a saying with EVA mass. If it feels like you're moving at snail's pace, you're doing it right. But that's not how you do this. These jetpacks are 600 meters a second stealth speed, which is terrible. It's like real one, the heaviest ones ever have been. It maybe with more modern materials, like 6, that's 10 fuel jetpacks instead. This is my Lunar Mobile Lab. It's basically just a mobile science lab, of course, for processing samples from useful landlord, which you may have seen on right. Too. It also has a fuel tank. Refuel the land. Of course, it only enough to refuel the land twice. One of these holds as much as a 800 or 80 or fuel tank. And it has two 200 size fuel tanks, which means, oh shoot, yeah, I need to get the Kerbal out. Kermit was rescued for a crew recovery mission, crew rescue mission. So I've decided, I originally thought I would just put them on the moon mission, but I want to get them back soon so I can unlock other contracts that will only be available as I finish Pomeroy is going to re-enter, going to get his recovery system in action. It's too far away to outside of visual distance. Just rename it so I can filter it. Sorry, I'm experiencing bugs. Sometimes right click this. Sorry about that, because I understand it minimized. But this is not working. Poor Pomeroy's going to drift off after risking it. Oh, there we go. It's little purple. Probably there all along. Hard to. That helps. Maybe I was so close before. Probably actually was. Let's see. Start. And run that track. Oops. Critical problem. Or have the mobile lab fully staffed, 2 other recovery vehicles in orbit, almost identical to this one, except one is both have probe cores. Actually, it's good they need that after a couple launches. So, essentially the same thing. You'll see how I'm going to deorbit just the capsule to meet this part's orbit. Circular orbit, so that it's not really flat. Sooner I'll get out because it's low. I need to make sure the option looks wrong. Don't want this right click this suborbital system. probably the case that I'm just going around stuff. For some reason, I've noticed in places where this is less than some places. Trying to fix this. I've actually reported it on the squad forums. I don't think they've done anything about it yet, though. There we go. And oh, drop. Distance from his capsule. And there we go. This is an orbital trajectory. Still, this is suborbital. I didn't need to pre-deploy the parachute with this capsule, so of course I can do that on its own. Name this properly. Right clicking. Hold on. I mean, not that it matters, but I'd rather not. Taxes and space taxes yet. This is now I actually that facing before, so by the time I re-enter, this should enter widen first, which should be more stable for reasons I care not to explain. It also will put the parachute properly oriented for deployment. But just to make sure. So, this capsule will recover. I will complete the contract. But I face away from the planet just because things are lagging, the ocean is visible. But I will complete the contract, and then I will start the moon mission. I am wondering if 42 kilometers approximately is local distance. Oh, yep, it's good. This is not gonna bounce out. I have to make a second pass. Though I don't think we're gonna come down anywhere near the KFC. Hard to tell from the side. Nope, we're not gonna make it. We're gonna be on the opposite side of the planet. Or maybe a quarter of the way. Starting to reduce physics warp as we're getting lower because that can create issues. Some things experience a lot of drag. Vessels can break apart that are perfectly stable at one time. And this does have parts that can break off. Most importantly, the parachute. Here we go, re-entry. Is that all we're hit? Wow. Just worth checking. I have a contract to test one of these parachutes. It's the XL size. Never mind. Maybe I'll be close. Now as if I screenshot the parachute at all. Surprisingly, I've never actually landed in a grassland spot before. Just the ocean area and the highlands once. Now I'm just trying in vain to select this puzzle. Yeah, this is pretty early in my career, for those of you who are there. I mean, I don't even have access to anything but the smallest of 2.5 meter fuel planes, and that doesn't get you many places, especially without any of the 2.5 meter engines, which means you don't have anything appropriately sized on the bottom. I'm just using the old, I wouldn't call it a trick, but two surface samples, one in the capsule, one on the Kerbal this way, because, and EVA reports, just because the Kerbals, for whatever reason, can't hold to. And I have no desire to spend forever in a day trying to collect science on a round curve. Missed. He fell right off the ladder. I'm trying to get one on the ladder. The thrusters help a little bit. The jetpack. They don't actually provide enough thrust to hold people up. Should be enough to overlook but one of which does. I think that's what caps out at. But I was saying, the EVA jetpack can't hold the firm up under one geographic, but it can slow the descent to jumps, which gives them the gravity that you can reach, but due to the game having lag select grab, you won't grab by that could have waited in orbit, perhaps not close to the CNC. You guys are being taken watching this. So, I apologize here. I'm going to quickly cut the recording and start it again. Keep the recording file into so that I'm going to upload the recording. I don't need to watch it. I got this sweet game after or anything in the chat. Apologize if you so I'll be right back.